Assalamu alaikum. If you're taking the academic IELTS, then you should use formal language in both task 2 and task 1. On the other hand, if you're taking general IELTS, then you should use a semi-formal style in task 2. And in task 1, in general IELTS, the choice between formal and informal depends on the letter itself that you're going to write. For example, if you're writing to a friend, then you should use informal language. But if you're writing a letter to your manager, for example, then you should use a formal language. In today's lesson, I'm going to explain the difference between formal and informal styles. So let's watch. It might be a good idea for you to review the video entitled Lesson 17, because in this video, I explained the difference between formal and informal English in details. Again, one more time, I'm going to explain this difference, but you'll have more information in that video. So you could watch it and then continue watching this video. Okay, so let's talk about exaggeration. Exaggeration means using strong adjectives which really indicate your emotions or how you feel about something. So strong adjectives like when you say magnificent, fantastic, amazing, mind-blowing, terrific. All of these are strong adjectives used to indicate how much you are impressed with a certain thing, how much you feel about a certain item. So in the formal English, you don't use exaggeration, right? Because you can think of formal English as maybe scientific English, maybe a language which is devoid of emotions. So you're not really addressing how you feel about a certain issue, but you're addressing the information and the intellectual aspect of this issue. So emotions do not really exist in the formal English, but they do exist in informal English. So it's not acceptable to use exaggeration in the formal English, but it is acceptable in the informal English. Like this example, I spent a fantastic vacation in Alexandria with my friends last week. So we're using the strong adjective fantastic, which means it was wonderful, it was amazing. But you can't really use this language in the formal English. You say something like, my vacation time in Alexandria was quite enjoyable. So this one is calmer, quieter, with a reduced intensity of emotions. Okay, let's move on to the next item. Using questions. Basically questions like you're asking about something. Now, this is acceptable in the informal English, but not acceptable in the formal English. You might start an essay in informal English this way. Have you ever thought about how advertisers influence the audience? So that's a question. Actually, when you start with a question like this one, it makes your article or your essay so exciting, because in my opinion, the best way to capture the attention of the audience is to start with a question, because the reader will feel, I don't know the answer to this question. So I need to continue reading this essay in order to find out this answer. Now, this is acceptable in informal English, but it's not acceptable in the formal English. You cannot do this. So instead of saying, have you ever thought about how advertisers influence the audience? You can say, advertisers influence the audience in a number of ways. This is how you can start your essay in a formal way. Or if you want to make it as a question, and one more time, this was explained in details in lesson 17, you might say something like this. Many researches have been done to illustrate the techniques used by advertisers to influence the audience. Basically, this sentence has the same meaning of that sentence, but this one is informal, whereas this one is formal. Okay. Using stories. Okay. Stories are not acceptable in the formal English, but they are acceptable in informal English. You may ask me, a story like what? Like this one. My friends and I were watching TV when one commercial really caught our attention. We started wondering why this commercial was really catchy and unique. We came up with a number of reasons why some advertisements can be more effective than others. So this is a great way to start an informal article or an informal essay. You see, there is a story, so the reader will feel engaged and interested, and he or she will feel like they need to continue reading the story. But you can't start like that if you're writing a formal essay. Not acceptable to use a story. Okay. Using personal examples. Okay, of course, using personal examples is acceptable in informal English. And it is acceptable in the formal English only in the IELTS. Of course, away from the IELTS, you cannot use personal examples. If you're writing a research, a scientific research that will be published in an international magazine, you can definitely not use personal examples to support scientific data. You cannot do this, but you can do that in the IELTS exam. Why can you do that in the IELTS exam? I'll tell you why. Because in the IELTS exam, you don't have access to any references, right? You don't have you can't use the internet, you don't have books, you don't have anything. So the only way for you to provide examples to illustrate your opinion is by coming up with personal examples. So this is acceptable in the IELTS, but not acceptable outside the IELTS. You can't use personal examples, of course. Let's look at an example here. Many citizens in my city have traveled abroad over the last few years. This indicates that immigration rates are high. You can use this example in the IELTS. It's a personal example. Definitely, of course, if you're writing a research in which you're illustrating whether immigration rates are high or not, you can never use a personal example like that. Okay. Using the first and second person pronouns like I, first person, you, second person, we, also first person. Now, this is not acceptable in task 2 because, as we said before, task formal language is supposed to be impersonal, not related to people, but we're talking about a universal truth, a universal fact, a fact which is applicable to anyone, not just to you or me or anyone. So you can't use first and second person pronouns, generally speaking, in the formal writing. Of course, it's acceptable in informal writing, no problems. You can make it personal. However, pay attention and concentrate. You may use first and second person pronouns if you're writing your introduction. Also, if you're writing your conclusion, because in the IELTS exam, they will ask you to mention your opinion. How can you mention your opinion without saying, I believe, or in my opinion? So you will be forced to use the first person pronoun at least if you are writing your opinion. So despite the fact that it's not acceptable to use first and second person pronouns in the formal English, but it should be acceptable in the introduction, particularly when you're asked to write your opinion. It should also be acceptable in the conclusion if you did not have a chance to mention your opinion in the introduction. Also, if you are writing personal examples in the body paragraphs, you can use first and second person pronouns because, as we illustrated in the previous item, that you can use personal examples in the IELTS exam. But in the body paragraphs, away from the examples, you can't use first and second person pronouns. So one more time, you can use them in the introduction or in the conclusion. You can't use them in the body paragraphs. The only part in the body paragraphs in which it might be allowed to use first and second person pronouns is if you're writing examples. And as I said, in the informal English, it's totally acceptable to use first and second person pronouns. Okay. The generalization. When you're talking about general facts, you're not talking about specific situations. Now, if you're generalizing in the formal English, use the plural form. This is the best thing that you can do. For example, you say it's important for people to exercise in order to lose weight. People. Okay, now if you're generalizing in the informal English, you may use first person pronoun or second person pronoun. For example, to lose weight, you need to exercise. You make it personal. This sentence has the same meaning as that sentence, right? But this one is personal and informal. That one is impersonal and formal. Important for people to exercise, you need to exercise. Okay. Active and passive. One more time. Formal language is impersonal. So you shouldn't mention people. You shouldn't mention who did the action. That's why it's recommended that you use the passive as much as you can in task 2 in the IELTS exam. You say, for example, smartphones are manufactured in Egypt. Passive. By who? We don't care. People don't matter in the formal language. But if you're writing an informal essay, use people. Yeah, mention the people who did the action. Use the active voice. They make beautiful smartphones in Egypt. They, right? That's informal. Passive, that's formal. Contractions. Let me explain what contractions are. Like this, the government isn't planning on increasing the prices. Isn't planning. That's a contraction. Isn't. You see, apostrophe in, apostrophe T. Now, that's acceptable in informal English. We're coming. Look at that. That's a contraction. They finished. So this means we are coming. They have finished. Don't waste my time. Do not waste my time. Now, this is acceptable in the informal English, but it's definitely not acceptable in the formal English. So you don't say the government isn't, you say the government is not planning on increasing. We're coming. Here in the formal English, you say we are coming. They finished. In the formal English, you say they have finished. Don't waste. Formal, do not waste. So contractions are not acceptable when you write task 2. Grammar. So if you're writing a formal essay, you need to use a mixture of complex, compound, and simple sentences. But if you're writing an informal letter or an informal article, feel free to use short, simple sentences all the time. You can do that, no problems. Okay. Idioms, like it's a piece of cake. It happens once in a blue moon. A piece of cake means very easy. Once in a blue moon means rare. Idioms are not acceptable in the formal English, but they are acceptable in the informal English. Proverbs, like when you say a verb in hand is worth 2 in the bush. A proverb is usually a quote that has a certain wisdom, right? You're trying to teach people a lesson. So you may use them in the informal English, but you can't use them in the formal English. You can definitely not do that. Vocabulary. If you're writing a formal essay, use formal vocabulary. If you're writing an informal essay, use informal vocabulary. You might ask, what do you mean? Use formal vocabulary or informal vocabulary? I don't know what that means. I'll show you some examples to explain to you what that means. So if you look at this expression, say sorry, that's informal. But if you want to make it formal, you say apologize. This means that if you are writing an apology letter to your manager, you can't say to your manager, oh, hi, sir, I would like to say sorry that I cannot attend the meeting today. No, you will say, hello, I hope this letter finds you well, for example. I would like to apologize for not being able to attend the meeting today, and so on. Informal, go up, say increase. So instead of saying the sales have gone up, you should say the sales have increased. Go down, decrease, set up, establish, look at, examine, piss off. Piss off, that's very informal to make someone angry. I think you hear it in the movies all the time, but definitely you cannot use it in a formal essay. You cannot say many people have been pissed off by the increase in prices. Of course, that's wrong. Maybe you say something like bothered, annoyed, upset. Find out, discover, put off, postpone, think about, consider, go against, oppose. Finally, to let me go. Formal, permit me to go. Also, here are some expressions which are used in the formal language. In my opinion, you make it informal, you say, I think, acceptable, okay, children, kids, negative, bad, right? So it's not a good idea to use the word bad in task 2. Also not a good idea to use the word good. You might use a word like negative, positive. It's all right. No, say it's acceptable. It's really big. No, say it's considerable. Smart, make it intelligent. Finally, don't use abbreviations in the formal writing. So instead of saying ASAP, say as soon as possible. Instead of using the word TV, say television, photo, photograph, net, internet, ads, advertisements, and so on. The last thing that I would like to say in this video is that if you're taking the academic IELTS, so both task 1 and task 2 should be formal. If you're taking general IELTS, task 2 should be semi-formal. So if you ask me, what's the meaning of semi-formal? So you know everything that we studied, use some of these linguistic features and ignore the others. So we said, for example, that if you are writing an informal essay, you can use a story that's acceptable. You can use contractions that's acceptable. You can use maybe personal pronouns and so on. So use some of these features and don't use everything. So don't use everything that's related to the informal language, and at the same time, don't use everything that's related to the formal language. A semi-formal essay is somewhere in the middle between a formal essay and an informal essay. That's what you need to know. So one more time, the meaning of a semi-formal essay is an essay that has some aspects of the formal language and some aspects of the informal language, like a mixture of both of them. Task 1 in general IELTS could be formal or informal depending on the topic. As I said before, if you are writing a letter to your manager, then you should write a formal letter. If you are writing a letter to your friend, then you should write an informal letter. So I suppose this is everything that I can say about formal and informal language. I hope today's lesson was useful, and I will see you in the next lesson, inshallah. Have a nice time. Assalamu alaikum.